Whenever I'm starting a new project, I always like to take a few minutes and just work out the details of the painting. So we're going to be doing cards on textured white paper, and we're doing some pansies, and this is my reference photo. So I'm looking at the reference photo and I see that the petals have some beautiful markings in them that I want to make sure I know how I'm going to go about painting those before I start on the actual card fronts themselves. I also want to look at the leaves and how they're structured and find out what brush I can use to best paint those leaves and what brush I can use to paint the petals. And I also want to think about how my color scheme is working together. So I see I have a yellow center and kind of a pinkish red purple. This is kind of an odd color. So I've mixed together some alizarin crimson and added it to my Diox purple. And I've gotten a pretty close purple, as you can see in my palette here. So we're going to use that, and I decided to go with a cad yellow for the center, and then I'm going to mix a little bit of Indian red into my purple to get some of these markings in the petals. So I like to take time and just decide what colors go best, and maybe I want to change it up a little bit before I start the actual card front. And I just want to practice my brush strokes for the petals and the leaves before I dive in. So this is really part of the planning part of doing a painting. I think the better you plan, the better your painting is going to come out. So I like to use my watercolor notebook, my little painting journal, and I'll leave this reference photo here so that you can see it as we paint together today. And this is my journal, just a little spiral journal, and I tape it off because I only want to do little thumbnails. I'm going to be practicing leaves and petals, so I just want to do small sections. So I take my page and I tape it off all around the edge, and then I just tape off 4 sections so I can do everything on one page in my journal. While I'm talking about supplies and things like that, I'm so excited. It's so nice to be married to an engineer because I needed a little incline for my painting board. In watercolor, you want sometimes you want your color to run down to the bottom of the bead, and I've been looking at some tabletop easels and whatnot, and my husband and I were talking about it, and he experimented in his workshop downstairs, and he came up with a brilliant little incline platform for me to paint on. This is just a little piece of plywood that he's put a little ledge on the bottom so that when I put my paper up, it won't slide off. And then this is just a platform to rest the board on. So if I turn it, you can see that this is just 2 pieces of wood that are glued together. And I can get a little incline by putting my board right on top of it. And then when I go to paint, I have a ready-made incline. And the beautiful thing about this is, if I just need a little bit of an incline, I'll use this side, but if I flip this over to the other side, if I need something a little higher, if I need a steeper incline on my board, I can use this side. And this is just a really ingenious little tool that my husband made for me. So I want to share it with you. If you would like to make something like this, if you're good with working with wood, feel free to copy our little pattern here. Or if you would like my husband to make it for you, just drop me a comment in the, just drop me a note in the comments or a private message, and I'll get back with you and we'll figure figure something out for you. But I just love using this little tool, and it's much smaller and easier to work with than some of those larger easels. I found that I really, for the size paintings that I'm doing, I don't need those little easels. I don't need those big tabletop easels. So here's our reference photo. Here's our incline board, and here is our journal. And we're going to be practicing first in the journal to make petals that are going to go on these beautiful little pansies. So I'm using a Princeton Heritage number 6 round, and I think that I can do this entire painting with this brush, but let's see as we get going here. I may need to go with a little bit of a thirstier brush than this, but we'll see. I think I can get away with one brush on this one. So let's get started. I'm going to start with my alizarin crimson color, and we're just going to be working on petals. I'm not going to be working on completing a painting. This is just a study. I'm doing little thumbnail studies before I go to my textured paper to do the actual card. So I'm going to do one petal, and I'm going to hold my paintbrush pretty far back, and I'm going to roll my paintbrush back and forth. Make sure I get enough paint on there. Okay, so I'm going to roll it one way and then the other. And when I lift, I'm going to pull down, because what I want to happen is for my darkest, deepest color to run to the bottom of the bead. I'm going to blot off my brush a little bit, and I'm actually going to lift some of the color from the top of my petal so that more of it is running to the bottom of my bead there. And I'm going to let that dry before I start another petal, because I don't want to have my other colors run into that darker place, because see, when you get to the center of your petals, it's darker, and that's what I'm creating right now. And I want to leave this white space underneath of it so that later on I can go in with my detail, and it will have a white background, so it'll stand out very beautifully. All right, so I'm going to let that dry a little bit, and let's make another one, because we want to, be very comfortable with being able to paint these petals when we get to our actual painting. All right, so let's try another one in a different square. So I'm going to load my brush, and this is about a tea consistency in the paint. I have a lot of water in my pigment, and I have loaded my brush to hold a lot of water and pigment together. So I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure, I'd say maybe about halfway on the pressure on the brush. When I lift, I come to the center of my petal, and I'm just going to help that paint find its way to the bottom of the petal. I'm always thinking on these pansy flowers, because you see that each flower head has 3 petals. Each petal originates from this center. So I'm always thinking about the center. I want to leave that center white. So it's almost like I'm painting around a circle. All right, so I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to pull a few. I'm going to lift it a little bit out of the center of this, because what happens when you do that with a dry, damp brush or a clean, damp brush is as it dries, it's going to leave some lines, like some veiny kind of lines in my petal, and that will make it look a little variegated. So let's let that dry, and let's go on to another one. Okay, let's come over here, and we'll do something a little bit different with this one. We're going to begin like we did with the other two. Okay, rolling the brush and bringing that darker color down toward the center. Notice the shape of the petal is kind of a teardrop shape. And on this one, I'm going to dip my brush, just the tip, into my cerulean blue, and I'm going to add that to the bottom. And I'm also going to come up here and drop in just on the very tip of the petal, and I'm just going to let that mix in with my alizarin crimson. I'm going to lift a little bit of that. Got a little heavy there. So just go back with a thirsty brush and pick some of it up. There we go. I'm going to pick some of that up on the bottom as well. And we'll let that dry for a while. Okay, and remember I'm on, my incline it's a very shallow incline, but my journal is tilted so that the paint will run down to the bottom of the bead. Alright, so I'm going to come back up to this one. It's partially dry. It's dry enough that I can move it around and paint without everything flowing together. So let's go to our second petal. And what I'm thinking about is I'm going to have three, so I'm thinking about a triangular shape. So I'll have, here's one petal, the other one is going to be facing this way, and the other one is going to be facing this way. So I want to turn my journal around a little bit so that it's not at an awkward angle, and my petal is going to be facing this way toward the center. And I'm leaving that white space as I create my petals. Load a little more paint in that brush. Okay, and toward the center. Okay, I'm helping to keep that rounded shape in the middle here. Okay, now I need to let that dry a little bit. So I've changed my incline to help this petal out. Do a little bit of lifting. Alright, there we go. Gonna lift that out a little bit, and I noticed this one over here was starting to run in the opposite direction there. Alright, and while I have my journal tilted this way, I'm going to go ahead over here and put another. I'm just practicing my petals. This is my favorite part of planning a painting, because I get to experiment with different brushes. I get to experiment with color. This is a study. It's not the final painting, so it's okay if I make a mistake. This is where I'm working out my my tools, my color palette. A little bit. Darken the center of this one. Alright, so I think I'm pretty happy with the process of painting these petals. We'll go ahead and finish one of these petals, one of these flower heads, so that you can see what a finished one looks like, and then we'll go to working on some of the greens around the flowers. Alright, so I'm waiting for this to dry a little bit. Alright. Remember, white space is good, especially in the center here. I'm going to lift this, go down to a flatter incline, so my paint is not running so much anymore. And let's go here and put in a third petal, and let's try if we can improve a little bit on that. Alright, so I want the darkest part to be down toward the center. Alright, so I'll pick that up a little bit. And I'm going to drop in a little bit of our cerulean to darken that even more. Blotting off my brush. And picking up some of that excess moisture there. Okay, let's darken the other two petals just a little bit in the center and keep darkening that up. Okay, so now I want to see how the greens are going to look up against. I'm going to let that dry a little bit and then come back and put the yellow centers in with the little stamens. But while that's drying, I'll go ahead and let's see how this number 6 round does with some greens. So I'd like to, let's start in this corner. I'm going to lay down a line where the stem would go. And I think for the first leaf, let's just use the side of our brush and put in a leaf shape. I'm trying to leave a little weight coming down the center to show where that vein would be in the leaf there. And let's go into our cerulean. I'm just going to drop in a little bit there to darken where the leaf and the stem meet. That's pretty. Okay, so we'll definitely use that. Alright, let's reload with our sap green and do another one here. I'm just pushing down with the belly of my brush, leaving some white in the center and just indicating leaves. I'm not painting and drawing and getting very fussy with this. I'm just indicating some leaf shapes with the tip of my brush and with the side of my brush. Okay, I'll go into my cerulean again. And if you use cerulean to show the darker parts of these leaves, it's also going to create some color harmony because we use cerulean in the petals too. So it's good to repeat colors, and when you're mixing, to try to mix that same color in with other hues just to create harmony. Just a little color mixing tip. Alright, let's go to the other side. keeping my page pretty flat right now. I don't want for my pigments to run to any edge of these leaves yet. Okay, so let's come over here, lay down a stem, and let's just, with the belly of the brush, push down for a leaf shape there. And let's have some stems coming off of that one. And I think I'm just going to put some little smaller leaf shapes here. Just vary it a little bit. Okay, and keeping the rule of 3 in mind, things that are in groupings of odd numbers like 3s and 5s are much more pleasing to the eye than 2s and 4s. So we call that the rule of 3. Stay away from those even numbered groupings. Just dropping in a little darker color where the stems and leaves meet. And I think that's going to look very nice on our card front. We're keeping it simple. See, I'm not painting every leaf from my reference photo. I'm just pulling shapes, colors, indications of things. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with that. We're going to let that dry and then come back and put in the center of this flower head, the rust. I'm going to pick up a little bit of Payne's Gray, which is almost black, and drop that in because I haven't tried that effect yet. So let's use this one and experiment a little bit with it in the center and see if we like it. Alright, let me turn the incline the other way a little bit and see what this Payne's Gray does. I kind of like that, so I'm going to drop just a little bit of the darker Payne's Gray into the flower head that we're working on. Okay. Okay. Alright, so we're letting that dry for a little bit. Okay, so this is just about dry, except for the center that had a pretty thick coat of paint on it. And I'm actually going to come in here and re-wet this a little bit with a very fine detail brush, and I'm just going to, this is a clean, damp detail brush. It's like a number 2 round from Creative Mark. Very small, pointed bristles on the end, and I'm just going to pull some stamens out, and I'm just going to go maybe a quarter of the way through the petals. I'm not going to pull it all the way across, just part way. I'm just using the color that's already there. And that looks pretty good, so I'm just going to stop there, let that dry completely, and then I'm going to go back in and put the yellow center. Okay, now that my center is completely dry, I can go back in and put the yellow part in. Yellow and purple are complements, so they're very nice next to each other. But if they run together, they will make a brown, so I don't want that to happen. So that's why I want to make sure that everything in the center there is completely dry before I do this. Alright, so I'm using Naples Yellow from Mission Gold, and I'm just going to go right in the center of my flower and drop in just a yellow bead. And I'm just not gonna mess with that because I don't want it to blend with any of the other paint that is underneath. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with this composition. I'm happy with the color harmony that's going on. I'm happy with the leaf shape, the petal shapes, and as I said, I was trying to get away with painting the leaves and the petals with this one Princeton Heritage No. 6 round, and it worked, and I love that. So this is a great brush. Princeton Heritage No. 6 round. Love it. The only other brush that I had to use was this Creative Mark No. 2 round, and I just call this a little detail brush because, oh, let me get it so you can see it. It's a teensy tiny little brush, and I was able to pull out the stamens with that. So what I would do at this point is, now that I have determined what brushes and what method I'm going to use to paint these petals and leaves, I would go ahead and just practice on these other 3 little thumbnails just to get really comfortable with painting these leaves and petals. And you know, maybe there are some other little tricks that I'd want to add, maybe a little more contrast in the leaves with different shades of green. But you know, I would go ahead and spend some time and just playing with the paints and the shapes and trying to make this just as beautiful as I can. But for the sake of the video, the time on the video, I'm going to stop there, and we will come back and get started on our card front. Okay, we've used our reference photo and created a few thumbnails of the painting that we're going to do on the textured paper. And we've worked on petals and leaves and gotten our color scheme worked out, built our palette. So I'm basically using sap green, Naples yellow, alizarin crimson, and cerulean blue. But I have added and kind of mixed these colors just a little bit to alter the tone of each color. And you can play around with your colors and get them the way that you like. This is one of the things that you can work on when you do your little studies in the journal before we create the card front. So now we're ready to do the card front. And we're going to be making our card front on this beautiful textured paper. And this is from a company called Black Ink, and it's distributed by Graphic Products. And I've left the link to this paper in the comments so you can find it. And you may not be able to find the exact pattern that I have here, but you will find similar papers, so just pick one that you like. but this is a hand molded paper, and it is cotton, I believe, and it's very absorbent, so it's easy to paint in watercolor on. So this is the paper we're using. You buy it in very large sheets. I think this one, before I cut it, was something like 22 by 30 or somewhere in that neighborhood. So you can go online there and pick the paper that you like. Just make sure that it's white or a natural off-white color. I wouldn't really go for the tinted ones, you know, kind of stay in the natural family. So that's the paper that we're going to be using. I have cut my paper to the size that I need and taped it down to my board for two reasons. One, I want to make sure my paper doesn't buckle as I paint on it. And secondly, I want to have a clean border when I'm finished. So I tape it down to my board, and we are ready to paint. I'm still going to use my reference photo just for placement of these two pansy flowers that we're going to paint here. I've decided to stick with my Princeton Heritage number 6 round, and that's about the only brush we're going to need, except for a small detail brush when we get to the end. So let's paint. I'm going to start with my petals and go into my alizarin. And this first one is going to be a little above the center line of my paper. And I'm going to make 3 petals for each flower head. So here's the first one. Just kind of rolling my brush around. I'm not concerned with the little spaces that are being left in this petal. That's going to add to the beauty of this petal. I am going to reinforce the bottom of the petal a little bit with some darker pigment just on the bottom. And remember, we're looking at the center of this flower is round and it's white, so I'm going to be leaving some white space right at the bottoms of each of these petals. Now, unlike my study, which took a little bit longer to dry, this paper is so absorbent that I really don't have much drying time. It's almost dry now, so I don't have to worry about my paint running. I'm going to go ahead and turn my board and do the second petal. Okay, and remember, we're doing a triangular shape because there are 3 petals. So one is going to face this way and one is going to face this way. White space is good, so I'm not going to worry about that. It actually adds to my painting. I'm keeping this rounded center, so everything's facing back toward the center. And one more petal. This is actually so much easier than my study because of the way that this paper reacts to the paint. And that is a very beautiful start to my pansy flower. Alright, so let me turn this back right side up. And my next flower is going to be below it and a little bit to the right. Let me go in here. And you just want to look at your petals and make sure that you're not making the patterns, that you're not falling into a pattern where they're exactly alike. So since I have one, my first petal was pretty vertical, I'm going to start the next one in a different orientation, just for variety. And I'm going to get a little pretty close to my last flower head there. We want to make sure that the darkest part is at the bottom of the petal. So I'm going to drop in a little extra alizarin right down at the bottom. Just darken that up a little bit. And while I'm at it, I'm going to darken my first center a little bit. And I'm not making it perfectly round. I'm just hitting where pigment already was, just darkening that center a little bit. Alright, let's do another petal. Turning my board Makes things a lot easier to work in this orientation. All right. I'm always visualizing my strokes before I lay them down. So take your time with this. And we're not going back over things. So when you lay it down the first time, let those white spaces live. It brings life and vibrancy to your petals when you let those white spaces live. All right, I like the way that that is looking. And we're going to go ahead and darken the centers just a little bit. And then we're going to let that dry completely before we touch it anymore. I'm going to add a little bit of my cerulean to the centers here as well, just to give a little pop of color and also to darken that even more. Darken my center even more. All right. Very good. Nice. All right, at this point, I'm going to take a quick look and make sure that I want my orientation to be, I don't know if I want this to be the top or the bottom yet. So let's look and see which orientation lends itself best to the fibers in the paper and also my flowers. And I'm thinking that that looks pretty nice because then my greens can kind of anchor the bottom and a little bit here. I think I want this to be a vertical card and not horizontal or landscaped orientation. So this will be my top and this will be my bottom. I'm going to let this dry completely before I put any more detail in, so we can actually start working on our leaves. The heaviest part of my leaves are going to be in this corner down here with some balance up at the top. So let's start with putting in a few stems, and I'm pretty sure here that I'm going to be able to stick with my my Princeton brush here. All right, so we're going to just come in here and pull a stem all the way through, all the way down. And then on the second one, I can sort of pop my stem up from the center and come all the way down with it. I'm going to drop in a little bit of darker green near where the stem meets the flower head. And now we're ready for some leaves. These leaves are going to be very abstract, but one thing that I notice is there is a leaf right up at the top here that is pretty well formed. So I'm going to, if anything is going to be realistic looking in this foliage, it's going to be that one leaf. So I'm going to pop in a stem, and then I am going to use my light touch to begin, and then I'm going to push down to the belly of my brush and lift. I'll load the brush a little bit. I'm loading my brush about halfway here, and I'm going to do the other side of the leaf. I'm going to leave a little bit of white space for a highlight. Push down to the belly of the brush and lift. Okay, so there's my first leaf, and that turned out beautifully. I'm going to pop in a little bit of blue and just let that blend to give some depth to that leaf. All right, so the next one I'm going to choose, because we don't want to leave a lonely leaf here, so we want to kind of balance that. Let's balance it on this side with this is going to be several parts to this leaf. I'm just going to lay in, I'm just going to push from the tip down to the belly of my brush and just let that be very abstract. And now the next one, I'm going to lay in a stem. And broken lines on these are much better than solid lines. Let the viewer fill in missing parts. Alright, now I'm going to put in my leaf. And on this one, I'm going to start on this. I'm going to use a very light touch for the point of the leaf. Push down to the belly of my brush and lift. Beautiful. Right, now I notice that there's a little green leaf right here that I want to try to emulate. So we're going to start from this side and make a smaller one. Push and lift. But that's going to be kind of smaller. This is the big leaf here. And then this is this little smaller one. And we're going to make some, we're going to draw some line detail at the end of the painting, so it will add some interest at the end there. I'm just going to pop in a little bright green leaf right here because I felt like it would look pretty there. And you don't have to follow this reference photo exactly, but just look at the parts of it that you like and try to include those in your painting. Okay, so that looks a little more balanced. I really don't need much more up here. So we're going to come down to the sides here. In the reference photo, there's a lot of leaves. There are a lot of leaves on the right-hand side. I'm not sure I'm going to follow that. I think I'm going to put the weight of my foliage on the left-hand side on my painting. All right, so let's pop in. We're going to do a very abstract one here. We're going to throw in a stem, and now I'm going to use the belly of my brush. I'm going to push down, and I'm just going to pull out. Very abstract. Throw in a stem. Okay, I'm going to push down and just flick that brush out to the side. Leave some white space, and we're going to put in another one. Flick it out to the side. Okay, now I need some stems to kind of anchor these leaves down. Just putting these in rather randomly and varying my green. I have in my palette, I have some dark green mixed and I have some lighter leaf green mixed. And you want to try to keep varying that color a little bit. Alright, so here, let's go to the next stem, and I'm just going to draw a leaf shape here, push down and lift. Okay, maybe carry that down the stem a little bit, pick up some lighter green. I'm just going to put in a few leaf-like shapes and stems. Very light here, so that our eye is being drawn to the center of the page and not to the edges. So the edges should be lighter. And let's put in another darker one. Push down. I'm just going to wiggle that around and come up with some very interesting shapes. On this one, because of the texture of my paper, that made a very interesting mark in the middle of that shape, and that's one of the reasons why I chose that spot to put that leaf in. All right, how about a little bud here? And just an indication of a stem. With a drier brush, just a couple of strokes here to indicate leaves. And I don't think I'm going to mess with that too much more. Maybe This is a point where you get so tempted to overwork your painting. And I actually think I'm going to stop right there and put in a few detail lines after it has dried a little bit more. So let's go ahead and stop while it's looking nice. Fighting off the temptation to overwork. Alright, so now I want to make sure this is dry, and it is not dry enough, so we're just going to give that a couple of more minutes to dry and then come back and work on the centers of the flowers. Okay, we're back and ready to put in the yellow centers of our flower, and I've switched over to my little Creative Mark number 2 round Mimic brush, and this is just a little detail brush. Use what you have. And we're going to go into our Naples yellow and just drop in a very bright center. Alright, just a little center here. And on this one, right. And I think that's really all we need to do right there. While I have the yellow on my brush, I'm just going to come up and use it, put a few accents on a few, not every leaf, just choosing a few where I need a little bit of a highlight. I'm even going to soften that off a little bit on this one. Okay. Go back in there with a little more green. I don't want to draw your eye away from these, the center of focus here. So we don't want anything too bright anywhere else. Okay. I'm going to take some darker green and just very lightly do some line work on these leaves. Just a touch here and there. We don't want to overdo this part. Where the stems meet the leaf, meet the flower head is a good place to darken. I'm just using very thin, fine lines. Don't want to overdo that, so I'm going to stop right there. And I'm going to go into my black and just mix a little bit of blue. Black tends to look very flat and lifeless, so I like to add another color whenever I'm working with black. And we're going to go and do some line work right in the center. just to darken up the very middle. Going around those white spaces, just to draw your eye in a little bit more to the center. Right. And I think that's we're going to call that finished. The only thing left to do now is to put in a little bit of color in our background. But make sure your painting is completely dry so that the background color, which is going to be very light, doesn't cause any of your other darker colors to bleed into it. So let's give that a few minutes to dry. While we're waiting for our painting to dry, I'd like to talk a little bit about the cards that we're going to use to put our card front on. And I like to use these Strathmore watercolor cards. This is the full-size card and envelope set that is 5 by 6 7/8, and this is what they look like. It's just the card, blank card, and the envelope, matching envelope to go with it. And we're going to attach our painting to the card front here. The watercolor cards, Strathmore watercolor cards, I'll leave a link in the comments so that you can find those. You get 10 for, I get these anywhere from, $6.99 to $9.99 in either Michael's or online through Amazon. They're pretty easy to find, and you can actually watercolor right on the card front here, but I like to use these to attach my painted card fronts too, because I just like the thickness of them and the texture and everything. So we're using these Strathmore watercolor cards for the card front. Okay, our painting is dry enough that we can put our background in. And I'm going to start with some clear water on a number 10 mop. I decided to go to a larger brush to do this background. It's just a lot easier, and the background is very loose, and it's just easier to use a bigger brush. So I'm going to paint with clear, clean water, no pigment, and being careful not to touch any of my flowers. Just get this water down in some of the white spaces of the card. I'm just doing this very loosely, and I'm not worrying if I miss a spot here or there. I'm going to put some color down, and it's just going to run into all the cracks and crevices of the paper. Alright, and I'm using yellow ochre mixed with some Naples yellow. And a very, very loose wash. I'm using a lot of water. I just want to tint the background. I don't really want a lot of bold color here. So I'm just going to drop in a little bit of that yellow and let it blend out. I'm going to hit the tops of this texture just a little bit. I'm not trying to saturate that. I want to leave part of the white in the textured areas. And I'm going to leave, I'm going to come around this corner, and then I'm going to start really hop, skipping, and jumping through these leaves, leaving a lot of it white. Maybe get a little more color down at the bottom. But in this area here, I'm going to leave a lot of white space. Okay, so we have just tinted the background just a little bit. And that I'm going to call finished. So this is our floral textured card front, and I hope you enjoy it. We'll come back and I'll show you how to assemble the card after this completely dries. We'll take the tape off and do our final assembly. So see you in a few minutes. Okay, our painting is completely dried, and it's time to glue it onto our card, and that is going to be really beautiful. So the first thing we need to do is place glue on the back of the card, and I'm just using a regular Elmer's glue stick. You can use any kind of glue that you like, and the important thing is to get all the corners and edges really well. Okay. All right. So I like to start by centering up the top edges first. I'm just looking at these top corners and getting those even. And then I can just kind of pull the bottom down so that the bottom, if there's the same distance from the corners to the edge, that's what we're looking for, because this paper is textured and it's not perfectly, the corners are not perfectly perpendicular. So as long as our corners are right, then the rest of the card will be fine. Okay, so once I get that placed, I'm going to turn it over and use my bone folder and just go over the whole thing and make sure that all the glue catches. Okay, and there we have a beautiful greeting card to send to someone. If you're putting these together for sale, if you're doing a craft show or whatnot, what I like to do is turn the envelope over so that the flap side is out, so that people can see that it's an envelope, and put it together like that, slip it into a plastic display bag, and I'll leave the link to these bags in the comments for you. And I just slip it in. They usually have a little glue strip on the outside there. And you just fold the flap down, seal the bag, and then that way people can pick it up, look at it, and without leaving fingerprints and dust on the outside of the bag. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and leave me a comment. If you'd like to get notifications for new videos, make sure to subscribe or follow. And if you just liked the video and would like to let me know, leave me a thumbs up or a share. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.